afternoon. My name is Marisol. So recently, well, for a long period of time, there has been an excessive amount of tanks being stored in deserts all over the U.S. This excessive stock of tanks is just harming the U.S. Because this is an issue because there are too many tanks being produced, and there's no place in which to store them. So they're just placed out in the desert, and they're never going to be used ever because there's no need to. We have enough weapons. Therefore, this is harming the environment, and so for this excessive stock of tanks is just harming the environment because they're being stored in these deserts and just left there, and it isn't allowing plants to grow like they're supposed to, or animals are taken away from the habitats because they're placing these tanks there. So these tanks just collect dust. I think I made that very clear. Okay. So they're also harming the economy. It has a direct effect on the monetary waste, resulting in a higher government deficit, just adding more debt to our country. The cost of building a tank is roughly about $100 million annually, because it's not only paying for the products to produce these tanks, but also to pay the people that are making these tanks. So just a whole lot of cost, and just a waste of money because it's just not ever being used. It's also harming the general public in the sense that these funds are causing other government-funded programs to lack funds. The taxpayer, and also the taxpayer money, well, it's our taxes that are paying for this, so it's just useless. In conclusion, according to Congress, the only reason these weapons are being made is to keep our nation protected from foreign attacks. But are they really keeping us safe? They're just kind of not even being used. So it's just harming our economy, our people, and the environment. So now I say thanks, but no thanks.
All right. I think your argument is clearer at the end of the speech than it is at the beginning. And there's more of a preview, more kind of, I guess you would say, a summary at the end. Your argument comes down to this. The United States has an excessive amount of tanks that is harming us in some way. And the way it's harming us, it's doing environmental damage, it's doing economic damage, and it is doing damage to our priorities, something along those lines. That's the way your argument ought to be structured, so it's so much easier to follow. As it was, I just couldn't really tell what the arguments were when you were making them. You talked about an environmental harm, and I'm going, okay, so what's the harm of them being in the desert? Apparently some plant can't grow, but I don't know what plant. I don't know how much space they take up. I don't know where they are. I don't know that there's any consequence to flora or fauna, and there's not a single source citation anywhere in the speech. That's a problem because you're making claims and you don't have anything to back up those claims. So that's a little bit problematic. The closest you get to having some data in your speech is the information that says it costs $100 million to build these tanks. And again, I'm sure that you got that data from someplace, but you don't tell us where it is. And if it's $100 million a tank, well, then let's do a little bit of math. How many tanks do we have that you say that we don't need? If we have, I don't want to do math in my head in front of people. It's always embarrassing. If we have 100,000 tanks, that's a lot of money. All right, so you could figure that out and then make an argument that says this is the chunk of change that we're talking about, and these are not ever going to be used. You keep saying that they're useless, but I don't hear any military expert that says they're useless. I don't hear any historian that says that tanks are no longer used as weapons in military conflicts. As far as I know, tanks are being used on a regular basis in places where active duty military personnel are engaged in combat operations, even if they are not, in open war. But we have, operations in the Middle East and in Afghanistan where I assume that tanks are part of that process. And their availability might function for some other reason, but we don't get any, like I said, there's not any explanation about what makes them useful or useless except that they are in the desert. If we have 100,000 tanks in the desert that haven't been used in 20 years, that's a pretty good argument that says these are, a waste of energy, time, money, and space. That's fine, but I don't have any data that says that. I've just got your claim that says we got a lot of tanks that aren't being used. I'm not sure if you're making, I don't really think you're making the argument that says let's get into a war so we can use these. That's not the inference that I think you're saying. I think you're saying we don't need more tanks than we have. I don't know how many more tanks we're building each year. That's another thing that's missing from the argument. So I think you need to develop the background a lot more. There's just a shortage of data in the speech that makes it hard to kind of focus in on what your claim is. However, I like the exit line a lot. That's going to make a great bumper sticker.